Welcome to the Popcorn Talk Network, for the online broadcast network that features movie discussion, news, and interviews. Press 1. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies.
From the Popcorn Talk Network, the online broadcast network for movie talk, and the schmoes know, this is Guilty Movie Pleasures. In-depth discussion on movies, no matter how guilty they make you feel.
Hello, Schmoville, and welcome to a very special episode of Guilty Movie Pleasures. How special is it? Well, Josh Macuga's not here.
That is always special.
Josh Macuga had his birthday party last night. To explain to everybody really quick, that's one of the many reasons he won't be joining us. He is still the host of the show.
Yes.
I just figured I'd come in on this very special episode, joined as always by Mr. Ben Begley, our co-pilot.
Hello,
And
hello.
You know what? We're down to Macuga today.
Yeah,
But we are up a nerd.
we are.
Not just any nerd. We are up the king of the nerds.
Yes.
He actually hosts a show called King of the Nerds.
He's the co-king. There's two kings.
And
There's two kings.
But there's only one Booger. And I am
Yes.
so excited to be not only featuring Revenge of the Nerds, which is one of my favorite comedies of all time, on Guilty Movie Pleasures. With us for the show is Curtis Armstrong, ladies and gentlemen, a.k.a. Booger.
Thank you all. It's amazing how you were able to fit all those people in here.
It's pretty crazy, right?
Everybody just sit down.
Please, calm
sit
down.
Please.
We have to get through the show.
Thank you. My God, what a crowd.
How is life now? Because you had Revenge of the Nerds and it came out, and it was a huge phenomenon in 1984 when it was released, and it permeated the culture, and it continued. They made 4 nerd films,
Yeah.
and now on TBS every Friday night you can catch King of the Nerds, which is hosted by you and Robert Carradine, who is also the star of Revenge of the Nerds. So how does it feel just being in that world still?
Well, it's, I mean, to begin with, it didn't really create a huge furore when it started. It was really, it did well for what it was, but we were not really a big hit at the time. It was something that percolated over time.
That was so interesting to me because, again, it came out in 1984, and there's a lot of great movies. If you do your research in 1984, that was a great year at the box office.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, between you got everything from Purple Rain to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom coming out, and so before we actually get into the movie, that was my question: is what was the opening weekend like?
Well, it was a strange situation because what happened was when we made Revenge of the Nerds, there was one regime in control of 20th Century Fox. It was a 20th Century Fox movie, and after we had started making the movie, they were replaced with a new regime. And the new regime came in, and they hated Revenge of the Nerds. They hated us.
The new regime was run by Ogre,
Yes,
a 40-year-old man posing as a fraternity brother.
exactly. So they said that they didn't want to release it at all.
What?
Yeah, they did. And so what they did was they, put it out with no publicity at all, in the third week of August or so. They buried it basically, and spent no money on it, nothing, figuring it would just go away. And it wound up doing very well. It made like $40 million or something in that initial theatrical
Which again
run.
in 1984, when you adjust for inflation,
pretty
is
good.
pretty incredible.
And especially considering it cost about $7 to make, in those days. So,
But how appropriate for such an underdog story about nerds
know,
rising
it
up
was.
to have you guys literally in real life, the movie be against all odds.
yeah, it actually wound up being that way because then this new regime, they dealt with it, and then but one of their policies was no sequels. They were not going to do any sequels of any movie. It didn't matter what the movie was; they weren't going to do sequels of it. So, that was the end of that. And then 3 years later, 2 years later, whatever it was, they were replaced by a new regime.
They loved sequels.
They're just a huge fan of sequels.
And the first one they greenlit was Revenge of the Nerds. Because by that time, because of cable and home video and all that, it had had gathered steam, and it had become a cult favorite at that point.
Well, and also, I mean, when you watch it today, and you know, I'm sure Ben, you watched it. I watched it twice actually last night because there's so many things that I missed from initially seeing. I mean, I saw this movie 100 times as a kid, all through high school and all through college as well. It serves as the template. I think that and Animal House are still the template today for every movie from Van Wilder to Old School,
Superbad to all that stuff.
Pitch Perfect. Even you have on a college campus, and it's basically some sort of conflict. And when you have the nerds versus the jocks, it's such a great mold to inject a lot of comedy in.
I have a confession to make. I didn't realize till about 15 minutes into the movie last night that I had never seen it, and it's because and here's
Get the hell out of here.
Here's why. Here's why. Because I was raised where, like, my parents, the worst thing a movie could have growing up was boobs in it. It was like I could see anything else, but if there were boobs, I wasn't allowed. So it was like I think I caught parts of it on cable, but like it was like edited. And last night I watched it, and I'm like, this is awesome. How have I never I just thought in my head, I was like, yeah, of course I've seen Revenge of the Nerds. And then 15 minutes in, I'm like, oh my God, I'm a terrible human being. How did I miss this movie?
What? You have to feel better about yourself than that.
I know. Just
because you didn't see it doesn't make you a bad person.
But I had to confess it. I didn't want to sit here and be like, oh man, in high school, because in high school, if I had seen it in high school, I probably would have watched it 100 times.
It really is one of those films that, you know, when you're hanging out with your friends and you know, in the time before.
Because I was that guy in high school.
Absolutely. Before DirecTV.
Still am.
The Ellis family had cable, right? The Ellis family, we had HBO, we had Showtime, we had Cinemax, and so all my friends would try to spend the night at my place.
Of course.
Because not only did the Ellis family provide the best food possible, all my friends would come over because nobody else had Pop-Tarts and toaster strudels.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
Wow.
That's toaster strudel.
You had a smorgasbord of
Wow,
breakfast
you guys
treats,
were loaded.
and you could stay up late at night and watch a movie that had boobies in it. And so I don't know if that was the way into Revenge of the Nerds, but once you get in there, the boobies are the last thing you think about because it's such a funny movie.
I mean, any way you get into it is the right way to get into it, I suppose. Which could be the motto for the movie.
There could be a motto for meeting a girl too. It's just any way in.
Any way in.
So that was how it all came about, and.
But originally, you didn't. I read on IMDb and like the fun facts. Originally, you were like adamantly opposed to playing Booger.
Oh
right?
yeah,
Is that,
yeah.
Or you were like, no, there's no way.
Well, I was, this goes back to I was living in New York then. I was a stage actor primarily, and I'd only done one movie at that point. And that was Risky Business, which I felt was a really, a great introduction to movies. It was a, beautifully made movie. And it was very well written and, regarded even at its time. And so then, of course, a year goes by with no work. And then Revenge of the Nerds shows up. And I thought that I went in to read for Gilbert. That was the part I read for because Booger basically barely existed in the script at the time. And so they needed to give actors something to read, so they gave me Gilbert. And I thought I was reading for Gilbert. And they said, well, Robert Carradine has been cast as Lewis, and you're I went, wow, Robert Carradine, that's great, and all that, and I'm going to read for that. So I went in and I read for it, and then I remember, as a matter of fact, Bronson Pinchot.
From Risky Business,
from
too.
Risky Business, and we've become friends as a result of Risky Business. He went in on Revenge of the Nerds, too. And he didn't get a call back. And I remember
Balky did not get a call back for Revenge of the Nerds.
And I remember talking to him on the phone because I then got a call from them saying, we just heard from Revenge of the Nerds. Anthony Edwards is playing Gilbert. You're not. But they really liked your work and they want to know if you would accept another role in the movie. And so I was thinking, well, it's not Lamar.
Probably not Takashi.
It's not Takashi. Can't be Wormser. I'm too old for Wormser. And I figured at that point it's either Poindexter or Booger, and with my luck it would be Booger. And I remember having a conversation with Bronson on the phone. I mean, we were outraged that he didn't get his call back. And I said, well, I'll tell you one thing right now. I am not going to throw my burgeoning film career away on a role like Booger. I said, they make an offer for Booger, I'm turning it down. End of story. And then they called and offered me Booger, and I took it.
Did you put up a fight at all, or was it something where it's like,
no,
okay,
yeah, I just said okay.
Well, you also, I mean, that decision, partially the character's name is Booger, and I can understand that as a young
There's
actor.
also nothing there, and they said they said at the time, well, don't worry about that because we're bringing you all out a week early, and before we start filming, and we're going to be working with the director and the writers on the film, and we're going to beef up this role a bit. And I was new enough at movies to not even think that I was being bullshitted. I mean, it never occurred to me that they would actually, because since then, it's been, whenever somebody says, oh, no, it's not the way it's going to be, we're going to fix it up for you. That's when run away quickly, because they will never fix it up.
Never be fixed.
So I was, we went there, and we were all sitting around, and we would just sit around for all week. We would sit around and work with the director and the writers.
How was it meeting the rest of the cast? Because when this movie comes on, I mean, you get to meet Robert Carradine and Anthony Edwards' character first, and then when they get to college, and I mean, the premise of the movie, if you haven't seen it yet, is that they have this nice freshman life until the jocks accidentally burn down their fraternity house.
Because they're doing a fireball. They're spewing alcohol and spitting fire all over their fraternity.
Yeah, and so...
Don't try this at home.
Do not. Or at least
one of the many things in Revenge of the Nerds you should not do at home.
At least don't face a curtain when you're blowing fire.
Yeah, he actually, the first two fireballs work fine, and then he gets
third
cocky.
one.
Then he goes, oh, no, I'll do it in this direction instead.
So kids, when you're drinking alcohol and blowing fireballs, the first two are totally safe.
Yeah,
it's the third one.
Have everybody step back. Don't be near the curtains. It's fine.
It's so funny because when the movie comes on, you have these different archetypes and you get to meet these individual characters, and then it's not until the jocks kick the nerds out of their place and the nerds have to live in the gymnasium that all these different...
Which is such a funny...
It's such a
funny
It's
concept.
such an outlandish premise, and it works so well for all types of comedy because in Revenge of the Nerds you have a lot of spoof jokes, and then you also have some straight up gags that it all coalesces into, again, one of the great college comedies of all time. And so when you guys were actually working on the film, was there a bonding experience like almost what happened in the film where you have to live in the gym together?
Oh no, I mean we were living in a motel in Tucson, Arizona. We were shooting at University of Arizona.
Which I loved when I read that because it's one of the great party schools in the country.
Well, and the dean or somebody was against it originally, right?
Well, the dean's name, by the way, was Dudley.
Yeah.
And they named Dudley Dawson after him because he was such a hard ass about the script.
That's hysterical.
And it's so weird how these things happen because they gave him a version of the script, which was it had a few things tactfully excised.
I'm guessing the panty raid scene was.
Well, I don't remember what
gone.
exactly, but that was what the approval was. And then, he found out about it, and it caused this big thing, and they wound up calling me Dudley Booger Dawson in his honor. But we at least were allowed to finish the movie. When they tried to reshoot the movie a few years ago, they were at Duke or someplace.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't remember where.
I didn't know they were trying to make a remake until I read about it, and I was like, what?
There's always been a big movement to remake Revenge of the Nerds, at least in the last decade, and they got pretty close in 2007.
Well, it wasn't
they had
just
the cast
close. They were filming. They were filming the movie.
Wow.
And the same thing happened. They gave the university a fake script, and then somebody leaked the actual script, and the university shut them down and refused permission and they tried to find another one, but they were in the middle of production.
It's yet another reason to hate Duke University.
Exactly.
Coach K can have his 1,000 wins.
Well, this was what my recollection is, and I might be wrong, so I probably shouldn't even say it, but my recollection is that was the reason, was because it was Duke, and they were still dealing with the
lacrosse scandal,
the lacrosse scandal. So that was they had that on their plate already, and then whatever was in the script, and I never read it. Bobby read it and said it was really, really over the top. I mean, extreme, and not in a good way.
Well, when you watch, we might as well open this can of worms now, is that when you see a classic like Revenge of the Nerds, and there's some movement, when, for whatever reason, this is the time we live in 2015, where there's so much nostalgia for the 1980s. So whether you're talking about Beetlejuice, or you're talking about Back to the Future, or Revenge of the Nerds, everybody says, oh, we should remake that. And I think that partially it's just studios are afraid to have original ideas. I can't imagine anybody else playing those characters, particularly when you get to Booger.
Well, I don't think they did. I think my recollection is they had all new characters. It was the same basic plot line, but all new characters, because they didn't want to recast those parts, and that's understandable. But I mean, it isn't just fear of new ideas. It's also, I think. They feel from a marketing standpoint, they have a leg
like
up.
a built-in fan base.
They have a built-in fan base who you'll get one weekend out of it.
Yeah.
And then it'll go to DVD and people will rent it and buy it. Which is all anybody cares about anymore.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, when you go back to the original film, and it's funny because you have the jocks versus the nerds, and the two real standouts, like what Ben alluded to earlier, is that it's Booger and Ogre, and in no scene is that better displayed than the belching contest.
Yeah. Right, and that's one of the things that's interesting about the movie, and it's in retrospect, it's one of the things that people talk about. Somebody wrote something online about this recently, about if you can step back for a minute, out of our fondness and our nostalgia about Revenge of the Nerds, and you look at some of the underlying stuff, there are a lot of really wonderful statements being made, and those are the ones that I tend to grab onto, and the ones that we use to sell King of the Nerds. But at the same time, there's some other stuff in the movie which is problematic, to say the least.
I will say, since it was my first time seeing it last night, when all of you are like, we're gonna get revenge against the sorority, I'm like, oh, cool, what are they gonna do? And then I'm like, whoa,
yeah, I know.
This is a little invasive and like borderline, like you would have to go around to your neighbors after this and be like, hey, so I did this thing in college, and I'm your neighbor now, don't worry, it's behind me.
Certain government-run websites have my name on them.
Especially Lewis with the hoodie in the shower, like penny red.
Yeah,
I was like,
I mean, it's under most definitions, it's at least assault.
Yeah. But
probably worse.
But do you think? I mean,
no. But here's the thing. I mean, I'm not giving. My point in bringing it up is one of the things that someone said recently was that what happens in Revenge of the Nerds is a classic example of a persecuted minority becoming the thing they hate.
Yes.
And that is also a part of what happens in Revenge of the Nerds. I don't think it was intended, but I think that is something that you take away from the movie when you see it. It becomes the nerds become the jocks.
That's right. And when they start out, they are the minority. And even you look back to something like what the jocks do, and it's like they're throwing bricks through windows and they're burning stuff on the lawn. It's like, this is a very Klan mentality that these jocks have.
It was intended that way because the writers of the film were actually making a statement on anti-Semitism and persecution of minorities. It was something they felt deeply, and Jeff Canoe, the director of the movie, felt deeply. And all of us, the people who were playing the nerds, we were all people who came of age in the 60s, and we had a concept of all of that. So everyone was aware of that underlying statement, so that when the jocks put a burning nerds thing up on, it's not possible to miss what that is a reference to.
Would you consider Booger a nerd? Because when you see the film, you meet your first two, for lack of a better term, king nerds, which is Anthony Edwards and Robert Carradine. And then you meet Booger, and he's the guy that I think most people identify with. And actually, like we were talking before we went live, that I'm wearing my drunk uncle shirt. Like this is what Booger, I think, would grow into, is that he's just that fun drunk uncle that you want to hang out with. And so
he's the guy with the weed. He's the one who kicks the party up, and it's just like,
is he actually a nerd?
By giving marijuana to a 12-year-old. It's a great idea. That was who Booger was. He was not really a nerd. And I think you know, I mean, I would love to talk to Steve Zacharias and Jeff Buhai, or the writers of the finished script, about what they had in mind with this, because I think that Booger, to me, represents, I mean, it's funny and it's all of the stuff that we remember Booger from, but another reason why Booger is important is because his presence in the nerd house indicates how these nerds are just totally accepting of everybody. Because the truth is, he's really kind of disgusting, and he's not like them at all, but he gets thrown out too. And they just, they don't even blink. They just say, okay, Booger, you're looking for the houses with us? He's with them. He's one of them. He's one of the outsiders. Yeah. And they accept that without question. So that's the message of tolerance, the message of acceptance is part of what Revenge of the Nerds is, and that's the point, that the purpose that Booger plays.
And the ending is actually pretty powerful when Anthony Edwards does. It's like, I was not expecting that, and having and saying, there's more of us than there are of you, and it's just, and especially now, watching it now with how nerd culture is huge. You know, I'm a big nerd. I'm a big comic book fan, all that stuff. But growing up, it was not cool at all. And now I'm like, man, I wish I was growing up now when everything nerd is cool. Yeah. And I think that even, I mean, because I was born in '82, but even in '84 when this movie was made, I can't imagine that this was we've been talking how it was kind of revolutionary at the time. There wasn't a lot of nerd empowerment going on. It was more that's what was.
I mean, it's one of the great things about it is that that last scene, which is my favorite thing in the movie, because it is so moving. They're standing up in front of different generations of people, and saying, you all went through what we're going through now. We're coming out. You come out too.
It's so good.
Stop hiding behind, whatever you're hiding behind, and join us down here. And that kind of the ability to motivate people to take a stand, with other people, is a tremendous thing. And I don't know. It's just one of the things about the movie that is special, and I think it's one of the things that makes people still relate to it so deeply.
Well, with the two warring factions that were on screen, when you guys were filming it, was there a bonding experience? Did you guys go out and party together? Was it a professional shoot? What's some of the craziness that went on?
The two were not mutually exclusive. It was a professional shoot, but that did not mean that we were not partying afterwards. In fact, we were in this motel, and it was divided up. There were two movie companies in it at the same time. We had Revenge of the Nerds in one part of the motel, and in the other we had a movie called Flashpoint with Treat Williams and Chris Christopherson. Oh. And these two, we took up the entire motel, and they partied too. And so in the evening, you'd go into the bar, and John Goodman would be there, and the nerds would be there, but so would Don Gibb, and so would Chris Christopherson would be up playing guitar with Bobby Carradine.
Christopherson's got some good stuff. If you talk about Booger being a good weed dealer, Christopherson might be the best of all.
It was really insane. I mean, there was furniture on the lawn craziness, and we had a wonderful time.
Who was the biggest animal? Who was the biggest party animal of the crew? Who was the one that's like, that's the guy?
It wasn't any of the actors. It was the camera crew.
Oh yeah,
they did better than anyone.
Sounds about right.
Because they don't have to look good the next day. They just have to make you guys look good.
Yeah, they did. They were madmen, and compared to them, we were really sort of very good boys. And we got around a bit, but nothing compared to the camera crew.
And they used a lot of the University of Arizona students as extras. Did they come out and party with you guys?
Oh yes, but not with us. They didn't come and party with the actors. They partied with the camera crew. I don't know. I think they maybe had the best drugs. I don't know what it was.
See, that's a lesson to all you kids out there, is that everybody wants to grow up and be a star. Yeah. Get a good union job, make sure you get some insurance, and you can party with the best one, because, again, you can be a camera. Yeah. You can be hungover all day if you want.
I just want to be a grip now. Forget all this stuff.
Those guys.
Quitting acting.
Those guys were amazing. Well.
Wow. Yeah, anything I've been on, and when we go out drinking, yeah, you're right. The actors are always kind of tame compared to the crew.
Well, you do have
wild.
to produce something, and unless you're completely crazy, you have some responsibility, and you go to bed at night. And
I mean, I even had the thought last night when we were at Macuga's birthday party, all singing karaoke, and I'm like, well, I got to wake up early tomorrow. I got to do morning radio, and then I got to come here, and it was such a treat. It was actually a pleasure to be like, nope, I got to go home.
I got responsibilities. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. I mean, when you see what this film has done, and then it bleeds into your show on TBS,
right.
King of the Nerds, nerd culture, like what Ben was saying, it is the cool thing now, and it's
taking over, and it's awesome.
How would you define a nerd? I've always been dying to ask you this question. How would the guy who played Booger define what a nerd is?
Well, I begin by saying, of course, I reiterate, I don't believe Booger was a nerd. I think I was in the movie, but I don't believe he was a nerd. However, he hung with nerds, and Curtis, was a nerd when I was growing up, serious nerd when I was growing up. So I would say that, and I define this based on what I've heard the various seasons on our show, the third one now, we would talk to the nerds on our show. And the definition that I liked best about nerds was someone with absolute passion on something, and it could be anything. It doesn't have to be computers. It doesn't have to be games. It doesn't have to be, it can be like I grew up a book nerd. I was a bibliophile. I collected books. I read books. That was my nerd thing. But we're talking the 60s. Things changed dramatically after that. But you can be a science fiction nerd. You can be, whatever. But then you have a subset of that, which is the geek. And the geek...
So it's nerd is the phylum, and then geek is the...
Geek is the one where you are a Star Trek geek.
Yeah.
You are a World of Warcraft geek. Whatever it is, the geek tends to be more specific, nerd more general thing. But the idea is that you are passionate about it and you want to share it with other people.
How would Ben do on the show? Because I feel like Ben loves talking about what a big nerd he is, but I don't know how you would do when you're competing against other nerds. Like, if I can take my talent, I am the world's greatest Tetris player. A lot of Schmobil already knows that. I will beat the crap out of anybody at Game Boy Tetris. That's my version. I think I could take that to King of the Nerds. What would you be taking to the table?
See, I think that the problem I would have is I'm a super big geek about so many things that
You're spread too thin.
I'm spread too thin. I love Star Wars. I love the X-Men comics. I like Batman. I like video games. It's just kung fu movies, random Japanese horror films.
You need to focus.
I need to focus on one thing.
Well, actually, what he's talking about on King of the Nerds is really an advantage. The only thing that you do not mention is academic and cosplay. There are things that we do, music. There are things that we do on the show. So somebody who comes in and they have, they're a great academic. I mean, this year we've got 3 doctors on the show. Wow. We have 3 people with doctorates. And one of them is a marine biologist. One of them works for NASA. One of them is a mathematician.
Nerds are kicking ass in 2015.
So we got those 3 people, but then and they're great on when the nerd challenges deal with what they do and what they know, but then they also have to do cosplay, and they also have to do the nerd anthem challenge, which requires composing, recording, and performing an original song about the nerd experience. And so all of these people have to do all of those other things as well. And one of the things that's great about it is sometimes they're terrible at it. and they're just, they ruin everything. And then there are other times where they discover they have this ability to do something that they never tried before. And so it becomes a different thing for them. They love that experience.
I love the competitive aspect of anything when you're putting people who are like-minded against each other, and there can only be one king. I think it's fantastic. One of the coolest things about this movie, or the fallout of Revenge of the Nerds, is that Lambda 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 actually became a real fraternity. Right. Have you ever made an appearance at a Lambda 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 house?
I've never made an appearance, but was it season 1, I think, of King of the Nerds? We did a radio show with the son of the director, and the director was there too, Jeff Canoe, and we were doing a live. It was like this, doing exactly this live webcast,
radioing,
the radio thing, and it was Bobby and me. Larry B showed up, surprisingly, and we were just having a lot of fun and reminiscing and all that. It was great.
That's fantastic.
Then, as another surprise, the guy had live Skyping in the Yukon Lambda.
That's so incredible.
They were all there, and of course, the great thing about the Lambda, it's men and women. And I think it may be the only fraternity recognized fraternity in the United States that is co-ed.
It's an amazing achievement to actually create a fraternity and a
these
a co-ed.
were all created by people who were rejected by all the fraternities or sororities. And they said, why don't we just do a Lambda Lambda Lambda?
You could be like, if you were like a SIG-Ep or something like that, and you go back to your college, you can probably maybe get into the fraternity house. You can get in to any campus that has a Lambda Lambda Lambda, and you'll be treated like royalty.
Well, I mean, we'd be treated well, I think, in general in fraternities, because the fraternities have claimed Revenge of the Nerds in the same way that the nerds have, which is a funny other aspect of it. I mean, I get people all the time coming up to me. Yeah, I get nerds all the time, of course, but sometimes I will get these guys come up to me, and they're jocks, and they're clear. I mean, they're no neck, muscles everywhere, buzz cuts. These guys. And they say, I just want to tell you that Revenge of the Nerds meant a lot to me, and I think I'm being, jerked around. And he says, that was my story. That was what I went through in college. And I would go, come on, you beat up people like me in college. And they'd say, no. And they would go on about it. And the truth is, we realized, and it deals with it oddly a little in Nerds too, that there is a pecking order in the jocks, and the guys who are at the bottom of that rung are just feel the same sense of rejection and everything else that the nerds do. So for some jocks, it did actually mean something. And I think that that's just cool.
I think that's great. I mean, for somebody who's never been good at belching or burping, like I can't burp on command, and watching that scene, how was filming that actual scene? How long did that take when it's you versus Ogre, which for my money are the two most memorable characters in the film? Is that you leave that movie thinking Booger and Ogre. You guys go head to head in an epic burping contest. How was the filming of that scene?
It didn't take long at all. I mean, it was very quick. We, once we went from the early part of the scene where we're doing the introductions and John Goodman and everything, that we then get up there and we start to do, I don't remember it being more than a couple of takes each. And all we did was because neither of us could come close to doing that on command.
How do you fuel it?
You just pretend. It's acting.
Because isn't it actually, I read online that it's actually like a human burp mixed with a camel sound or something?
A camel orgasm.
A camel orgasm?
Yeah. Which I didn't know.
Guess what day it is?
That took me really by surprise.
No, this is what happened.
Camel's orgasm, really terrifying.
Yeah, this is a true story. What happened was Tim Busfield, who played Poindexter,
who's also in the film, yeah.
He was, after we'd finished, he would hang out while they were cutting the movie because he wanted to learn about that. And so he would be in while they were cutting, and it was driving them crazy finding the belch for Booger, because nothing was long enough or fruity enough or anything, and there was no human who could accomplish it. So they had a good human one, but it wasn't enough. So they went and they started going through recordings of the Wild Animal Kingdom, hoping to find something, and they found this sound, a recording of a camel mating. and the sound that the camel made. And they went, "That's it! It's him!" And so they blended the human with the camel, and that is what I do.
I'm gonna go home and watch the movie again, just because now with that information in my head, I want to pick.
And
out
I
what
never
a camel
knew.
orgasm sounds like.
I never knew until whenever it was 10 years ago when we did the Blu-ray for Revenge of the Nerds, and they brought in everybody, and we were all sitting around telling stories and stuff, and that was when I found out what it was. Tim told me then.
That's amazing.
Wow.
That's been when.
Oh.
That's the winner.
See?
It just sounds like
Now
not like they're having fun. Camels.
No. Well, but
You don't always have.
You don't know that, and you shouldn't judge.
You're right. Hey, you know what? I'm persecuting camel sex. I'm sure it's very enjoyable.
They get whatever they get out of it, and you just have to. But that's
Which one is making that noise?
Oh, you can't separate the two. Now it's
just-
one.
No,
Yeah.
and the worst part of it is, now that I've told the story a few times, everybody can't get camels out of their head when they hear it. It used to be people actually thought I did it, which is ridiculous. But
Why do you think the movie has held up as well as it has? Because when you watch it, and sure, I mean, comedy is a very hard thing to keep fresh. So
Right.
when you see something like an Animal House or Revenge of the Nerds, what's the most impressive thing to me is that I'm still laughing today in 2015 watching that movie, because there's tons of comedies, and Revenge of the Nerds has defaulted a little bit because it spawned a lot of campus comedies that
Right.
didn't do well, that you forget about, that they don't even air on Comedy Central at 3 in the morning. Some of the funniest lines are Booger's lines. So was a lot of that stuff in the script by the time you guys shot, or did you improv it?
Some of it was. Some of it was improv.
Yeah.
And
Or you can eat that. It's still the one that gets me to this day.
yeah, that
eat
was improv because we didn't.
That's so good.
We had no way of knowing what the basketball going into the chili was going to do, and there was this big hunk of it on his.
Is that one take? Because that's got to be a bitch to, if you dump a basketball in
No,
a
that
vat
was
of chili.
one. That was
One and done.
That was I mean, I think we had done a bunch of takes of us up to that point.
Yeah.
And then
Throw the basketball.
and that was it. But you could only do it once because that was his outfit.
I mean, it really is. It's such a thrill to get to talk to you today, because I mean, I've never met you in person, and just getting to meet an iconic character from my childhood, from a film that meant so much to me and my friends. It's such a thrill. And Ben, I know you just saw this movie for the first time.
It's awesome.
How do you feel about Revenge of the Nerds and the comedy aspect of it holding up?
I just found myself cracking up and being like,
How'd they get away with
how did they get away with this stuff? And also, I felt myself really relating to the entire journey of the nerds, because I felt like how I felt in high school whenever there was a pep rally and they'd be super stoked for the football team and the swim team, and then they'd be like, and now the School of Theater.
Yeah, exactly.
They're putting on Romeo and Juliet, and I was Romeo, which was huge for me, and nobody gave a shit. It's like nobody cared. It was like,
I know. I
it's-
went through the same.
yeah, it was. I felt like I was really just more angry at myself for not experiencing it before, because I feel like it would have made me when I was younger feel like there were other people that felt the same way. Because when I was growing up, being a nerd was kind of shunned, and it would have been cool to have watched this earlier and been like, oh, we are going to grow up. What your parents say when they're like, you're going to grow up to be successful and the jocks are going to be mowing lawns,
Well,
you
it's
don't
hard-
believe that.
It's hard to make kids understand that,
Yeah.
though. I mean, you try to. I mean, my daughter's a nerd, and one of the things that when she was growing up, she had very different interests from everyone she knew, and it was difficult to try and make her understand that there was going to be a time. It's like in Revenge of the Nerds when Wormser is being dropped off at the gym by his mother and father.
seems so good.
And
Yeah.
she says, and he says, I don't want to be here. This is like we're refugees from a war. And he says, I want to be with people my own age. And she says, you will be with people your own age when you're older, which is one of my favorite lines in the movie. It's hard to explain that to kids, but one of the great things about King of the Nerds, and also for many years Revenge of the Nerds, but I got an email the other day from a woman who watches the show, and she's got like a son who's 12 maybe, And she said, I love this show because it allows my son to know that there are people like him out there.
And it's a fantastic premise, too, because a lot like what Revenge of the Nerds and Lambda did is that it takes the football players were just good at football, and then these guys have all these different interests, and at the climax of the film, that ends up paying off and helping the nerds win the day.
I love that moment. That was completely surprising to me when Lewis and Betty, right, have sex in the fun house. I was like, oh, she's going to scream and leave, because that's what would happen in a modern movie, is she would flip out, but it was such a smart choice to make her go, wait a minute. And he's like, jocks always think about sports, and we've thought about sex our whole lives.
She says, are all nerds as good as you? I mean, because, all jocks think about is football. All we think about is sex. But, I mean, that's one of the more, for the time, it was what it was. Now it's a little cringeworthy. But it was a... it all works out.
But a lot of that stuff, because in the 80s there was, Porky's, all that stuff. There was the kind of peeping Tom thing, but it was innocent in the 80s. Was it at the time? Was that considered?
It felt innocent when I was doing it a couple days ago.
Oh, drunk uncle.
But when I look at a kid, and obviously I'll let Curtis answer this, but when I was a kid, it did feel a little more innocent. When you're at a house across the street and there's a hot chick, and it's like, oh, I wonder if she's going to be showering right now. There was a certain amount of innocence to it, and I don't know if the internet changed that or just the fact that we got older changed that.
I think it's both. I think it's one of those things, and people look at it now, and it's been written about. That scene in particular has been written about, because again, by pretty much any standard, that's rape.
Pretty much.
So but that's our view of it in this time, and we look at it in a different way, obviously, now than we did then. And it is a difference. It is of its time, and you can find a lot of areas that are questionable, and a lot of the the way that Lamar is depicted, the way Takashi is portrayed, all of those, they're very funny and they're wonderful and we love them. But it's something you would never do now.
Yeah, I think it succeeds on two levels. I think it's still a hilarious movie, and it also serves as a great time capsule for what 1984 was like on a campus.
Well, look at this. Look at this. The fact that, look at the soundtrack of that movie.
That soundtrack is, I'm glad you brought that up. It is so iconic, 1980s. It puts you, and right when you hear Revenge of the Nerds, as the opening credits are rolling, you just so get put in that world.
But then the needle drops on the picture, like putting Michael Jackson. That Michael Jackson number, which was barely out.
Really?
Yeah, it had was just about to come out. It wasn't an old song, and you would never, after that, have been able to afford a Michael Jackson, especially Thriller. It was such a big record, and we got it. They just went, okay, Talking Heads, okay, here, have it. And they're, Queen, take it.
That's right. Yeah, we are the champions.
Yeah, we are the champions.
Yeah. What's putting a bow on this whole thing? And again, I'm so thrilled that you were able to join us today. We really appreciate it. Guilty Movie Pleasures. I know Josh Macuga in his. I think he's got to work today too or something. But I'm going to pretend he's in a hungover coma.
I think he's still sleeping in a coma.
What's maybe? And I don't know if you have a stock one that you always go to, or what's one more just like the craziest thing that happened on set, or the wackiest story that happened while you were making Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh, I can't go there. I can't go there. There are too many. No, that's not possible. Just take it from me. We were all lucky to get out of it alive.
So was that camel.
That camel.
When you watch something like King of the Nerds 2, you realize that how celebrated this film is, and that the hosts of the show, Robert Carradine, right, and Curtis Armstrong, were from Revenge of the Nerds, and you can catch King of the Nerds on TBS every Friday night, I believe, for the next 7 weeks, right?
That's right. Yeah, we
9 p.m.
premiered last week, so this Friday will be our second.
Make sure you watch it. And you can follow Curtis on Twitter. Actually, your Twitter handle is Curtis is Booger.
Yeah. It's one word though. It's not like Curtis's Booger, like it's a booger belonging to Curtis. It's Curtis is Booger. So That's it.
Make sure you follow Ben Begley at Ben Begley Comedy. You can follow me at 5150 Ellis, and of course at Schmoes Know if you guys are watching this.
And by the way, Bobby Carradine, you can find on Twitter. Bobby is Lewis. So it's we both went there.
Did you guys get Twitter handles the same day? Like we're gonna do
well,
this.
we had to because we didn't have Twitter until King of the Nerds. And they said, TBS said, you have to have Twitter. So they came out and set us up for it. And neither one of us could get our own names. So,
it's impossible. I wrote the dude. There's a Mark Ellis on Twitter, and I wrote him. He's got like 1,000 followers. All he does is retweet crazy like conspiracy theories. And I just wrote him, and I was like, hey, is there any chance you'd be willing to give that up? And he's like, well, seeing it's how it's my name, I don't think so. And I'm like, I can't argue that logic. It's a pretty good name.
That's why I had to go with Ben Begley Comedy, and I've regretted it ever since. Because now I'm like, everything I tweet has to be funny.
I'm 5150 Ellis. Everything I tweet has to be mentally insane. So we're about Van Halen. You know,
we're both screwed. Our Twitter account, we should just shut them down.
It's crazy, yeah. So make sure, thank you guys so much for joining us on this very special episode of Guilty Movie Pleasures. Follow Curtis on Twitter. Make sure, if you guys have not seen the film, do yourselves a favor.
Don't wait any longer.
Watch Revenge of the Nerds. If you can get it, Ben, thank you for bringing in.
I got a 4-pack of
Bachelor Party, Porky's, Weekend at Bernie's, and Revenge of the Nerds.
I was excited when I was super pumped.
That's a pretty good day at the movies.
I've never seen Bachelor Party either.
Bachelor Party. We have Tom Hanks coming in next week to talk about Bachelor Party. So make sure.
Okay, I gotta do my homework. I gotta do my homework. Tom Hanks' PR people are like, what?
He's like, did we have this in the schedule? Make sure you guys subscribe to our YouTube channel, Schmoes Know, as well as the Schmoes Know podcast channel. And very special announcement next February 19th, I'll be in New York at Gotham Comedy Club taping a TV set called Live at Gotham. So if you're in the New York area, make sure you guys check that out. Curtis, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you guys
for coming in here today and gracing us with your presence as Ben and I try to get over our karaoke hangover. King of the Nerds. It airs every Friday on TBS at 9 p.m. for the next 7 weeks. Make sure you guys check out Revenge of the Nerds.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, Christian Harloff, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of its owners or principals.